Hey folks, this is episode 3 of the Aquatic Tropical Environments series. In this episode, we're going to be making grass clusters using the Echinodorus Tenellus grass blades that we made. We're also going to be improving the scatter distribution system, and we're going to be making a substrate material. So without further ado, let's get to it. Open up your scene from episode 2, and you should have something like this. So I'm going to select this scatter plane here. I'm going to go to my modifiers. I'm going to delete the scatter distribution system. We've also duplicated some rocks and duplicated this plant here, which was the Crinum, and we're going to delete the duplicates. We don't need any of those, so let's just delete all the duplicates of everything that we've made. This is a duplicate, this one's a duplicate, delete that, and under the rocks as well we've got duplicates here. We only created 4 different rocks, so we want to keep these top 4, and we'll delete everything else. So I'm going to shift select all these rocks here. I'm going to hit delete. We also need to center the rocks for the scatter distribution system to work properly, and I'm going to scale them up so they're roughly the same size. With this empty here, which was the rock empty, I hit G and move that. You can see it's affecting the rocks. We're going to have a few of these empties for different aspects of the scene, so I'm going to move this into a separate collection called empties. With this object selected, I'm going to hit M for move. I'm going to add a collection. I'm going to call this collection empty, and I'll move it to that collection there. Now with all these rocks, I'm going to hit N to open up my N panel over here. I'm going to scroll all the way to the top until it goes to item, and then on the location, I'm going to hit 0 for X, Y, and Z. I'll do the same for this one. We'll hit 0 for X, Y, and Z. Do the same for this one. And I'll do the same for this one here. I'm also going to select this plant, 0 this out on X, Y, and Z. Let's just hide those a minute. And I'll also do the same for the Crinum base leaves. And we're going to 0 out all of these as well. So maybe I'll just hit Control C over a 0. I'll select this one, Control V to paste. I'm going to do this for all of them. Okay, so we'll share the same location in the center of the world. Just collapse that, the Echinodorus Tenellus. So I'm going to open up that collection, and I'm going to ensure that all of those are zeroed out as well. I'll select the bottom one, hit Control V to 0 out, and we'll go through all of these as well. Okay, all those are zeroed out. Open up the Echinodorus Amazonicus. We'll make sure that that's zeroed out. Go to the leaves, do the same for all of these. Okay, all those are zeroed out, so I'm going to close that collection to make sure all your lights are in a collection called lights. As for this scatter plane here, I'm going to hit delete, and this back plane, I'm also going to delete that. I might just 0 out the rock empty as well. Make sure everything's nice and tidy. We've got a light here. I'm going to move that to lights, so hit M, and I'll move that to the light collection. And I'll mute my camera as well. I'll mute the empty. So we should have this nice clean scene. And now with the Echinodorus Tenellus, these leaves here, so we're going to turn these into grass clusters opposed to just having them as individual blades. It gives a better effect. I'm going to mute that. I'm then going to hit Shift A, add mesh, and we'll choose plane. Go to top view, hitting numpad 7. I'm going to close this end panel, tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit S.5 to scale in by 0.5. I've still got proportional editing on. I'll turn that off, and I'll set my transform pivot point to individual origins and hit S.5, so it should be 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters. I'm then going to right click subdivide, and I'm going to subdivide it by 24 cuts. I'll tab out of edit mode. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate on the X axis, and I'll hold down Control so it snaps to the grid. In fact, I'll just turn snapping on up here. I hit Shift D, X, and I'll snap it to the grid again to around about there. I'm now going to shift select this one and shift select this one, go to top view, tab into edit mode. I'll click over here so none of the vertices are selected. I'm going to hit C for circle select, and if you scroll your mouse wheel you can choose the size of your selection, and I'm just going to randomly select some of these vertices here and hold down my middle mouse button to deselect some. Just want a random kind of pattern. Maybe that will do. I'm going to do the same over here. I'm going to hit C. You don't have to get this pattern precise, you can just do any pattern you like. So I'll deselect a few of these, deselect these, maybe deselect this here, maybe select this out here a bit. And then do the same for this one. Hit C, select some vertices. Once you've got these selected, I'm going to hit Control I to invert the selection. I'll then hit X and I'll delete the faces. tab out of edit mode. So you've got these 3 objects here. Okay, so now with the Echinodorus Tenellus collection, I'm going to open that and I'm going to select all of these objects here. I'm going to change this to individual origins, which it already is. Excellent. Then I'm going to hit R, Y, 90 to rotate on the Y-axis by 90 degrees. I then mute that collection, select this middle plane here. I go to particles. I'll then add a new particle system. It's going to be a hair. I'm going to click advanced, and under source, we're going to change it to random. And for the amount, I'm going to set it to 250. I'm going to go to render and I'm going to change it from path to collection. And the collection, we're going to choose Echinodorus Tenellus. Now we've got these grass assets appearing. I'm going to click object rotation and pick random. Enable rotation over here, and under phase, turn it to 1, and on the randomization, turn it all the way up to 2. I'm going to adjust the size, so let's say maybe 0.01, and I'll change the random scale to 0.5. Let's just see what we've got here. Okay, maybe need to make them a bit bigger. Let's say 0.025. I'll be happy with that. And then from here, I'm going to go over to modifiers, and I'm going to click make instances real. I'll then go back to my particle settings. I'm going to click this plane and then delete the particle system. Now delete that plane. All these objects here, we've got a lot of them, 250 in fact. So now enable wireframe, and that should automatically select your X-ray view. If you haven't got that selected, make sure it's selected. Hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'm going to box select all of these, hit Control J. Excellent. And we're going to rename this to Echinodorus Tenellus Cluster 1. Now by doing this, it's going to add another one of these into our Echinodorus Tenellus collection here. As you can see, this big one. So we want to take that and delete, and then we'll remute the Echinodorus Tenellus collection. We're going to do the same for these two. Maybe I want to change this slightly. I'm not quite happy with the selection here, so I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit numpad 7 for top view. I'll hit C for circle select. I'm just going to select some of these vertices here, and I'm going to delete these. X and delete faces. This corner is a bit off for me, so I'm going to hit C, circle select. I'm going to select all these, and I'm going to hit X, delete faces. I'll tab out of edit mode and then just drag this up. Then go to my particle settings. I'm going to add a new system. It's going to be a hair system. Click advanced, set it to 250. We're going to choose random. Under render, we'll change it from path to collection. We'll then choose that collection, which was the Echinodorus Tenellus. We'll pick random, object rotation, and then we go to rotation up here, change the phase up to 1 and the randomized phase up to 2. We'll change the scale, so that was 0.025, and we'll change the randomness up to 0.5. Okay, now we go to our modifiers and we click make instance real. We go back to our particle system, select the plane, we'll delete the particle system off the plane, and then we'll delete the plane. Hit numpad 1 for front view, go back into wireframe with X-ray view enabled. So now I'm going to box select all of these. I'm going to hit Control J to join, and now that's one mesh. Okay, again, it's going to add that in the Echinodorus Tenellus collection. So enable that collection. We'll select this cluster here, hit X and delete. Again, we'll mute the Echinodorus Tenellus collection. Just do this one more time over to here. Maybe I'll adjust the vertices a bit more. Tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit C for circle select, and I'm just going to select some of these. I'll hit X and we'll click delete faces. Bit more of an S shape there. I'll tab out of edit mode. I'll go to my particle settings. I'll add a new particle system. Let's just drag this up. I'm going to choose hair, set it to 250, click advanced, and we'll choose the distribution type as random. Go down to render, change it from path to collection. We'll choose the collection, Echinodorus Tenellus. We want object rotation and pick random. We'll change the scale to 0.025 and for randomness to 0.5. We'll scroll up, click rotation, change the phase to 1 and the randomized phase to 2. Now we go to our modifiers, make instances real, go back to your particle settings, click this plane, remove the particle system, and then we'll delete that. Again, I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'm going to select one of these, go into wireframe view with my X-ray view enabled. I'm going to box select all of these and hit Control J to join. Now that's all one mesh. Excellent. Again, I'll enable my Echinodorus Tenellus collection and we'll delete that cluster there. No need for that anymore. Now we'll take all of these Echinodorus Tenellus single blades, make sure individual origins is selected, and then I'm going to hit R, Y, minus 90, and that will just reset those back in position. I'll then hide that collection and I'll rename these to Echinodorus Tenellus Cluster 1, 2 and 3. Select all three of them. I'm going to hit M for move and we'll add a collection and we'll call this Echinodorus Tenellus cluster, and I click this button to move them into that collection. Excellent. They've already got the geometry node plant animators that we made attached to them, because if you remember, when we made the Echinodorus Tenellus single blades, they've all got the plant animators attached. So we don't need to worry about that, they're already on there. So now we're going to improve the scatter distribution system. So let's just add a plane, Shift A, add mesh plane. I'm going to hit N to open up the N panel and scroll to item. And for the dimensions, on the x-axis, I'm going to set it to 2 meters, and on the y-axis, I'm going to set it to, let's say, 1 meter. This will be the size of our fish tank. This is actually going to be the substrate, so I'm going to hit Control A and apply the scale. I'm going to hit N to get rid of that N panel there. I'll then tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit Control R. I'm going to add a loop cut here. So now I'm going to select everything. I'm going to right click and we'll choose subdivide. I'll then open up this menu here, and let's say I'll give it 8 cuts. I then collapse this menu, hit numpad 1 to go into front view, then going to hit E, and I'm going to snap it up on the z-axis to 1 unit, which is 10 centimeters. So it looks something like that. Tab out of edit mode, I'll go over to my modifiers, I'm going to click generate, and we'll choose subdivision surface. As you can see, these corners are rounded off. We don't really want that, so we need to tighten up some of the geometry on here. Let's just set it to 2 for now. I'm also going to hit Z to shade smooth, and now we'll tighten up that geometry. Tab into edit mode, hit numpad 1 for front view, going to zoom in, I'm going to hit Control R, I'm going to snap it, so I'm going to bring it all the way to the end, and then I'll bring it back by 1, 2, 3 units. I'm going to do the same for this side. Control R, bring it all the way to the end, bring it in 1, 2, 3 units. I'll then hit numpad 3, do the same to these corners. Control R, add a loop cut, bring it in, snap it to the end, bring it back 1, 2, 3. I'll do the same for this side. Control R, snap it to the end, bring it back 1, 2, 3. Excellent. Now I hit numpad 1, I'm going to hit Control R, click that in place, and then right click to cancel it so it stays in the middle. Then I'm going to hit Control B, which will bevel it. I'm going to snap it around so roughly that those corners are square, something like that. Okay, excellent. I'm going to add a couple of vertex groups. So over here, under data, you've got vertex groups here. So go into top view, and we're going to box select all of these inside vertices here, and then click plus on vertex group, and we'll call this displace group, and we'll click assign. I'm then going to add a displacement modifier, so go to your modifiers, click add modifier, and we go to deform, and we go to displace. I'll then click new, and we're going to choose that vertex group, which is displace group. I'm going to change the strength to 0.1 for now. I'll then click this button here, and we'll change it from image or movie to clouds. As you can see, we've only got the displacement on the vertex group, which is what we want. We'll go back to our modifiers. I'm going to change the coordinate system from local to object. We're then going to add that object. So Shift A, empty, and we'll choose sphere. We'll rename this sphere to substrate empty. I'll hit M for move, and we'll move that to the empty collection. Let's just enable this empty collection just so we can see what we're doing. We'll then select the substrate, and we'll choose that empty object. So that was search sub for substrate, and we'll choose the substrate empty. Now if I select that substrate empty, I'll turn off snapping quick, and if I hit G, you can see that the displacement in the substrate is mapped to the substrate empty object. So that means if we were to duplicate this object here, Shift D, bring it on the x-axis, it would have a different noise seed. Okay, let's just mute those empties, and we'll work on this displacement here. So with the substrate mid-level, we want this to be set in a positive direction mainly. I'm going to hit 0.25, and then it's kind of pointing upwards, but there's a few indentations, because what we don't want is the top of this to displace and go through the bottom. And maybe I can turn the strength up 0.15, and maybe I can change the scale of the texture itself. So click this button here to go to your textures, and I'm going to increase this to 0.5. Okay, so now on my data tab over here, I'm going to add a couple more vertex groups just so we can have a bit more control of where we scatter our objects. So I'm going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'll then select out of here so we've got no vertices selected, and I might choose a couple of these vertices here, maybe a couple here, maybe a few in the middle, around about there, and I'll click new, and I'll assign that, and I'll rename this to group 1. I'll just assign, we'll add a couple more, so I'll click over here, I'm going to click C, I'm going to choose these vertices here, maybe I'll choose these ones here, and select these ones here, just randomly selecting some vertices. I'm going to add a new group, I'm going to call this group Group 2, I'll click assign. Okay, click out of here, we've got none selected, maybe we'll select some there, maybe there, possibly over here, and some here. I'll right click that into place, we'll add another group, and we'll call this Group 3, click assign, and then click out of here. I'm going to add one more group, I think, so I'm going to hit C for circle select. Just going to grab all these here, maybe some at the back, something around about there. We'll add another group, we'll call this one group 4 and click assign. I then tab out of edit mode. So now we've got 5 vertex groups here, which we can use in the scatter distribution system. Now let's get on with improving the scatter distribution system. So I'm going to drag this up, I'm going to click this button here, and we're going to go to geometry node editor, drag this across, and with this object selected, I'm going to go to my modifiers. I'm just going to collapse these. I'm going to add modifier, I'll go to geometry nodes, and I'll choose that scatter distribution system that we made in the previous tutorial. This is what you should have so far with the node setup. I'll go to my modifiers, and under the scatter distribution geometry node we made, I'm going to go to density, and I'm going to turn it down to 10, just so we've got better viewport performance. I go up to here to set material. I'm going to click that node, I'm going to hit Control X. We're not going to need that. I'll just neaten these two up. S, Y, 0. Make sure they're level. I'm going to hit G, Y. We'll just bring this down. As you can see, the Didiplis diandra, or any assets that we spawn, are going to spawn in the direction of the normals. So with this align Euler to vector node here, if we reduce the factor to 0, they're all going to be spawning on the z-axis, which is dictated here. So ideally, we want this factor to be exposed over here. In order to do that, I'm just going to drag this and I'll drop it into the bottom socket of the group input node. I'm then going to hit N to open up this N panel, and if you go to group at the top where we've got the names of all our inputs and outputs, I'm going to choose that factor and rename it to rotation normal. Let's just increase this window, and I'm going to drag it up so it's below the rotation socket here. I'm going to have to clean these nodes up. Let me just do that quick. Okay, so now we've got that rotation normal factor in here. Excellent. I'm going to set it to 0 by default. Under rotation normal, the default value is going to be 0. Maybe we can change the density max default value to 2.5. I'll just change it on here as well to reflect that. 2.5. Going to click this node here, I'm going to hit GX, I'm going to bring this out around about there. So now the second feature I want to add to this, like what we did with the displacement empty, if I hit G and X and grab it across, it changes the noise pattern. I want to change the scattering distribution based on the location of the substrate, so we need to add this empty into the scene. So I'm going to hit Shift A, add empty, and we'll choose sphere. I'm going to rename this sphere to scatter distribution empty. I'm going to hit M for move, and we're going to move it to this empty collection. Reselect for substrate. We'll increase this window here, and we're going to enable the empty collection, and this scatter distribution empty, we need to drag it into this node structure. So I'm just going to drag that across and add it into here. We're going to set it to relative. Let's add a couple of nodes. Shift A and search for separate XYZ. Shift A, go to utilities, math, and we'll add a math node. I'm going to duplicate that math node, Shift D, and this first math node I'm going to set to divide. I'll then select the location from the object info into the vector of the separate XYZ, drag the X into the top factor and the Y into the bottom factor. Plug this divide into this math node, which is set to add, and I'll drag the Z value into the bottom value of the math node, and that is going to be the driver. The location of this empty is going to be the driver for the seed value, so the seed will change. So with this add node selected, I'm going to hit Shift D, I'm going to drag this all the way up to here, I'm going to plug the scatter seed into the top value and the value output into the seed, and then I'll drag this value from this add node into the bottom value of this add node here. I'm just going to neaten up this node structure. We've got one more addition to add to this, plus we'll rename a couple of things. So instead of having a single collection in here, we want the collection to be exposed here, so that way when we stack these we can add a different collection for each modifier. So we're going to delete this collection here. I'm going to drag this collection into the bottom socket of the group input node, and now we've got that collection info here, and I'm going to temporarily choose Didiplis diandra. And I'm also going to neaten up this node structure once again. Okay, so this is node structure so far. Take a screenshot. So now it makes sense for our density factor, which is going to be our vertex group, that we rename this to something more suitable. So with this group input selected, I'm going to hit N to open up this panel again. With your group selected here, where it says density factor, I'm going to rename this to vertex density factor. Now when I click this button, I can choose a vertex group, let's say group 1, and those items should only appear in that group 1, or I can choose group 3 or group 4. let's just turn up the density to 25. So I'm going to hit N. I'm just going to increase this window, take a screenshot if you need to. So now let's start building this scene out. I'm going to set this to 50. You can set it to whatever you like. And maybe instead of group 4, I'm actually going to choose the original group, which was the displaced group. I'm just going to turn off my overlays. I'll then collapse that geometry node system. I'm going to add a modifier. We'll go to geometry nodes and we're going to choose scatter distribution. Now I'm going to add another collection, but before we do that, it's important to choose your vertex group with this vertex density factor, because if you don't, let me just show you this quick as an example in case you encounter this problem. 2.5. So now if I go to this one and I'll add rocks, for example, let's find rocks. The rocks will actually grow on your leaves. I don't know if you can see these dots here. They're actually my rocks. And so if you don't choose the vertex group, it's not only going to distribute on the actual substrate itself, it's also going to distribute on everything that's on your substrate, like all these plants. And to combat that, we literally just click choose group. I'm going to choose group 2. And now these rocks will only appear where group 2 is. I'm going to turn this up. Maybe I can increase the size. I'm going to turn my Didiplis diandras back up. I think I had it on set to 50. We are having a slight problem with these rocks. As you can see, they're kind of floating in the air a bit. To sort that out, I'll just turn on my overlays. I'm going to mute this plane. I'm going to enable my rocks here, and I'm going to select all of my rocks. I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. You can see they're kind of floating above the origin point. So with all the rocks selected, I'm going to tab into edit mode, select all the vertices, and I'll hit G, Z. I'm going to snap it to the grid by a couple of units, just so there's a bit of intersection there. I can now mute my rocks. I'll re-enable this plane here. In fact, let's rename the plane to substrate. I'll then collapse these two windows. I'm going to add another modifier, which will be geometry nodes. I'm going to select my scatter distribution. I'll select the vertex density factor, and I'm going to choose maybe group 1. And I go for crinum thyanum. Disable overlays. I'm going to turn the crinum thyanum up till I can see something I like. Maybe change the seed, increase the size. Let's say 0.5 and 0.6. Maybe that's a bit big. 0.3 and 0.5. I don't want too many of these, so I'm going to keep changing the seed until I've got something that I like. I'm going to go into top view, which is numpad 7. I'm just going to make sure that none of these plants are going outside of the bounds of the substrate, because obviously when we build a glass tank around the outside, we don't want any plants intersecting or leaning outside of the glass. Okay, I'm happy with that, so I'm going to collapse that window. I'm going to add another modifier. I'll go to geometry nodes. I'll then select the scatter distribution. I'm going to choose a vertex group. Maybe we'll go for group 4. I'll choose a collection. We'll choose Echinodorus amazonicus this time. I'm going to change the size from minimum to 0.35 to 0.5. I'll then change the seed till I've got something that I like, quite like that. There's going to be a bit of intersection here. I didn't actually build a system where we cull other plants to stop them intersecting, but we can live with that. Maybe reduce the size, 0.45 on the max. I'm going to change the seed as well. I'm not quite happy with that. Ideally, you want the bigger plants to appear at the back. That's usually the way you set up aquariums for aquascaping. So you have larger plants at the back and smaller ones at the front, so it kind of creates a gradient. I'm even going to reduce the size a bit more, 0.25 to maybe 0.35. That one's intersecting with that plant, so we're going to have to change the seed. Just going to keep changing the seed until I've got something that I like. Okay, maybe something around there. I'm going to mute this empty collection here. So the final plant will be the Echinodorus Tenellus clusters, these grass clusters. So I'm going to collapse this window, add modifier, go to geometry nodes. We're going to select the scatter distribution. I'm going to change the vertex density factor to, let's say, group 1. Let's see what that looks like. And we'll go to the collection, and I'm going to choose Echinodorus Tenellus cluster. If I increase the density, turn it up to, let's say, 50 for now. They're a bit small. We can make them a bit bigger. So I'm going to set the scale min to 0.25 and maybe the scale max to 0.4. It's going out of bounds slightly here. We don't want that, so I'm just going to change the seed. I'll go to 7 for top view. I'm going to hit the scatter seed. It's going to keep moving this around until I've got something that I like. I'm going to bring up the density to 100. I see the problem that we've got. I forgot to do this. So with the substrate, we're just going to mute that. We'll go to the Echinodorus Tenellus cluster collection, and if you remember, all these are supposed to be in the center. So with this object selected, the middle one, I'm going to hit Shift C to recenter my cursor. Go to front view, I'm then going to go to Object, Set Origin, and Origin to 3D Cursor. I'll then grab this object, I'm going to hit G, X, snap it to the grid, and then go to Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D Cursor. I'll grab this object, I hit G, X, hold down Control to snap it to the grid, and then Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D Cursor. And now with all three of these selected, I'm going to hit numpad 1 for front view. I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to go to wireframe to ensure that X-ray view is turned on. I hit number 1 to ensure that vertex select is selected. I'm then going to box select all of these bottom vertices here. I'll zoom in. I'm going to hit G, Z. I'm going to drag these down to ensure that there's intersection with the ground. I'll then tab out of edit mode. We'll hide the Echinodorus Tenellus cluster collection, re-enable our substrate. Now they should all be within bounds, so I'm going to select this object, disable my overlays. I'm going to change the group to displace group, so that's all of them selected, and we can reduce the maximum size. It doesn't leave the bounds of the tank, something around about there. So now if I go into my viewport shading, see what we've got. Okay, and also if I push play, it should all be animated, and we've got a little biome system. One thing to take note with the rocks distributed, let's just find that. I think it was this one, maybe. Yep, this one. With the rocks, we've got the rotation normal. With plants, they usually grow upwards on the z-axis, so they're fine. But with the rocks, if there's a gradient in the land, usually the rocks would lean with the gradient. So if I bring this rotation normal of my rocks up, and then it will look slightly more realistic because the rocks will be leaning into the gradient of the substrate. If you've made it this far, you've done really well, guys. Give yourselves a pat on the back. The next thing we're going to do in this episode is we're going to make the substrate material, which will also randomize every time we duplicate or move it. All this is hanging off the edge a bit here. I don't like that. Let's just sort that out. I'm going to reduce the size of the grass clusters. Take the minimum down to 0.15 and the max up to 0.2. I'll just go numpad 7 into top view, make sure nothing's going out of the bounds of here. All looking good so far. That's right on the edge there. Maybe I'll reduce it a bit more actually. I'll go for 0.1 on the min and 0.15 on the max. And I'll just turn the density up as well to 200. Excellent. Don't forget to hit Control S and save. Let's continue with the substrate material. It should be fairly straightforward. So I'm just going to collapse this node here. In fact, I'm going to mute all of these geometry nodes. So we've got nothing here, just so we've got better viewport performance. I then go into viewport shading. I'm going to change this from geometry nodes to shader editor. I'm going to add a new material and I'll rename this to substrate. So I'm going to base it on the principal BSDF. I'm going to increase this window. I'll just drag this across so we've got a bit more room. So the first node I'll add will be a noise texture. So Shift A and we'll go for texture, noise texture. I'm going to change it to 4D. And we're going to add a texture coordinate. Shift A, input, and we'll choose texture coordinate. And we're going to use the object coordinates. And that object is going to be the substrate empty, I believe it was. Let's have a look. Substrate empty. So over here, search for SU for substrate, and we'll choose the substrate empty. And what that will do, it will ensure, let me just plug this in quick. What that will do, it will ensure that when we move the substrate, it's going to generate a slightly different noise pattern on every duplicate that we make. And for the scale, I'm going to bring this up to, let's say, 100. It's quite a good value, between 100 and 250 for example, for finer grains. And in order to do that, every time we duplicate this, we can map it between the scale of 100 and 250. We do that by adding a map range. So I'm going to hit Shift A, search for map, and choose map range, and then the minimum will be 100 and the maximum will be 250. Then we simply plug that result into the scale, and we can drive that with a object info node. So go search and type in object for object info, and we'll choose random. So now every time we duplicate this object, it's going to come up with a random value between 100 and 250. I'll just show you an example. We're going to front view, Shift D, duplicate that on the z-axis, Shift D on the z-axis, and as you can see, each one of these have got a slight different noise texture and scale. Now we need to add a bit of color into the mix here, so I'm going to hit Shift A and we'll go for converter, and we'll go for color ramp. I'm going to pop this into here. I'm going to select this white flag. I'm going to hit the plus button, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to hit it 3 times, so we've got 5 flags, and I'm going to set this to constant. This first flag I'm going to set to a nice sort of bright yellowish color, maybe something around there, maybe a slightly richer tone. I'm going to set this second flag to slightly brownish colour. Maybe we'll go for the blue. Yeah, we'll go for a slightly blue colour, and we'll turn it down to something around about there. This flag I'm going to set to a brownish tone, maybe around about there perhaps. this flag, I'm going to set to another yellow, but a slightly less saturated yellow. And maybe this last flag, I'm going to set this to a brown tone, but a bit less saturation, maybe a bit brighter, something around there perhaps. Now I'm just going to drag these flags about until I've got something that I like. You see the yellow coming through there, maybe a bit more blue, maybe a bit less brown here. Bring that sandy colour down, something around there. I'm just going to change this colour to a bit more orange. Maybe we can increase it a bit as well with this one, something around about there. Now every time I duplicate this object, I also want this to be a different colour. So let me just duplicate this a couple of times. Shift D, Z, just drag that up. Shift D, Z, just drag this down, just so we got a bit of variation here so we can see what we're going to get for our money. I'm then going to hit Shift A and we'll go for colour, mix colour. I'm going to pop this into here. So this colour will go into socket A, and I'm going to choose a bright yellow colour for here, something around about there perhaps. And I'll change the mix type to soft light. And then we're going to use this random factor and we'll plug it as the mix factor. So now all these should be a slightly different colour. Yep, we're getting a slightly different colour there. I'm now going to add another texture. So for the bump mapping, I'm not going to use this noise texture here. I'm going to use a different texture. So I'm going to hit Shift A, go to texture, and we'll go for Voronoi texture, or Voronoi. I'm going to change it to 4D. Choose smooth F1, and I'm also going to plug the object texture coordinate into the vector. I'm going to duplicate this map range node, Shift D, and we'll drive it with this random value here. Let's just see what numbers are good for this. So temporarily, I'm going to take this distance into the base color of the principal BSDF. Okay, maybe we'll start off with 250. Yep, that's a good number. And let's say 500. Yep, I'll be happy with those two figures. With this map range, we're going to set it to 250 for the min and 500 for the max. I then plug the result from the map range into the scale of the Voronoi texture. Now all of these should be slightly different scales. Excellent. So I'll plug the result from this mix color into the base color here. So we've got our sand color back. I'm going to add a bump node. So Shift A, go to vector, bump. We're actually going to use two of these. So I'm going to hit Shift D, bring that across there. We'll take the distance into the height of this bump node, and I'm going to plug the bump into the normal factor of the principal BSDF. We're getting some bump going on here. Maybe I'll set the strength to 0.5. One's a bit strong. Now I'm going to take this noise texture up here, plug the factor of that into the height of this bump node, and then the normal from this bump node will go into the normal of this bump node. So it's kind of like daisy chaining. We're definitely going to have to turn the strength down on this first one. Maybe I'll set the first one to 0.5 and the second one to 0.25. I might just disconnect this colour here just so we can see the bump on its own. Maybe I need to flip these around, so this one will be 0.5 and this one will be 0.25. Yep, that's a bit better. And then plug the result back in. Now we need to add a bit of roughness to this, so I'm going to select this colour ramp. I'm going to hit Shift D, I'm going to drag this down to around about there, and then going to take this distance factor and plug it into the colour ramp here, and we're going to convert these to black and white. It's an easy way of doing this. I'm just going to select this first flag, click this colour here, we'll turn the saturation all the way down. I'm going to click this flag here, click the colour, turn the saturation all the way down. We're just going to do this for all of these. We don't want any of these too dark. I'm actually going to lighten some of these. Select this colour and scroll your mouse wheel until you've got a slightly brighter colour. And the same as with this one, scroll my mouse wheel till it's a bit brighter, and this one too. So they're all slightly different shades. Maybe I'll take this white down a bit. Okay, excellent. So now I'm going to delete this top one, delete this bottom one. I'll then select this one, numpad 1 for front view, and I'm going to drag this colour ramp into the roughness of the principal BSDF. Okay, so that's the substrate done. I'm just going to neaten up this node structure quick, and I'll be right back. Okay, that's a bit more readable. One more thing, just before we go, I'm going to change this back to geometry nodes. So as you can see, this is called scatter distribution. So if I enable this one and open up this, just drag it across, you can see it's called scatter distribution here. So if I change the name here, it's going to change the name here, here, and on all the other ones. But we can change the name of the geometry nodes locally. So if I change this name, it won't affect the actual scatter distribution name. So I'm going to rename it locally. With this selected, I'm going to hit Control C, and where it says geometry nodes, I'm going to hit Control V and paste it into this slot here, and we've still got the scatter distribution name. So I'm going to do that with all of these. So with rocks, Control C, I'm going to paste it in where it says geometry nodes, Control V, and I'm going to do this to all of these, so then it's easy to see which modifier belongs to what collection. So I'm going to enable all of these. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, let's just do a basic lighting setup so you can render your progress so far. Just going to enable this lights collection here. So all of these are probably going to be unsuitable. So I'm going to select all the lights, hit delete. I'm going to go into camera view. I'm going to select my camera. I'm going to bring it forward a bit so it encompasses the scene. Maybe I can bring it up on the Z-axis slightly. And I'm going to change the X rotation, something around about there. I'll then hit Shift A and we'll go for light, choose area light. I'm going to hit G, Z, I'm going to drag this up to around about there. Hit numpad 7. I'm going to go to my light settings. I'm going to change it from square to rectangle, and I'm going to drag it on the x-axis to 2 meters and maybe on the y-axis by 0.5. Numpad 0 to go into camera view. Just going to go into rendered view. I'm in Eevee at the moment. We can do this in cycles if we want to. You'll probably get better results in cycles. In fact, I'm going to do it in cycles. I'm going to turn the power of my lamp up to 25 watts, around about there. I'm just going to select the substrate. I'm going to go to my modifiers. So we're going to open up the Echinodorus Tenellus, and for rotation normal, I might set this to 0.5. So I go back into rendered view. I'll collapse the Echinodorus Tenellus cluster modifier, and maybe we can change the color of the light. So with this area light, I'm going to hit M for move, and we'll move it to the light collection. With the area light selected, I'll go into my light settings over here. I'm going to change it to maybe a slight bluish colour, around about there. And then it's simply a case of going to output and then select the location of your choosing. I've got a location already selected called subscribe, OpenEXR with a DWAA codec. It's a small file size and it gives you a lot of dynamic range if you bring your frames into DaVinci Resolve for video editing. It's great for colour grading, and then simply hit Ctrl F12 to render out your image sequence. Alternatively, you can choose PNG or JPEG, and if you want a movie clip saved, change it from OpenEXR to FFmpeg and then go to encoding, keep it at Metrosky and set it to H.264. I wouldn't render out a movie clip in cycles because if it crashes halfway through, you're going to have to start all over again. But whereas with Eevee, it's a fast enough render engine, so you should be able to handle that. But if you are rendering in Eevee, make sure you've got your area light selected, go to your lights and click contact shadows. And I'll also go to the render settings. We'll have ambient oculation selected and screen space reflections, but I'm going to render this out in cycles. So I'm going to choose cycles, go to my output, change it back to OpenEXR and DWAA. I'm going to change my samples. So under sampling, I'm going to change my noise threshold to 0.025 and my max samples to 256. I'll then go to light paths for transmission. I'll set that to 16. I'm going to keep diffuse and glossy set to 3. I'm going to disable reflective and refractive caustics. It should speed up your rendering process, and then simply hit Ctrl F12 and that will render out your image sequence. So in the next episode, we're going to be making the glass aquarium, the water, including the volumetrics. We're going to make a proper lighting setup, and we'll make some glossy backing paper for the aquarium, which will also change colour every time we duplicate the aquarium. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope you found it useful. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.